because I get to start, of course, I'm going to start with my all-time favorite topic, Jetpack Compose. Now, I was actually preparing this talk, and I was looking for some inspiration, right? And so I watched the 2019 talk, the What's New in Android talk back then. And it made me realize that we've come such a long way. Back then, we introduced Compose as this new UI toolkit for all of you to try out. And now, Compose is our recommended toolkit for building UI on Android. And year over year, we see the adoption grow. We are now at 60% of the top 1,000 apps using it and loving it in production. And Compose gives us the features, the performance, the stability, and the libraries that you need to help build you beautiful adaptive apps. And also to build those apps faster, so that you can be focusing on those things that truly matter to your users. With the stable release of Compose, we've added lots of new functionalities, with more to come in the alphas as well. And today I want to highlight a few important ones for you. So let's start with Autofill. Autofill allows users of your app to automatically fill out form fields with personal information that they filled out sometime before. And you've been asking for Autofill support in Compose for quite some time now. And we've actually been working on it for quite some time now, to be honest. But it was quite a difficult thing to implement because we needed to do quite a big rewrite of our internal semantic system. We did that rewrite, it's done, and so the basic autofill APIs are available for you to use in the latest stable version of Compose. So let's take a look, right? Here you see a typical login screen with two text fields, username and password. And those two text fields both play a role in authentication, which we somehow have to convey to the autofill APIs. So how would we implement that? First, we get a semantics modifier. You've been using this probably in some other cases in your app as well. And inside, we have a new content type property. When you set that content type property, you can give it the role of the authentication that that text field has. So in this case, I'm setting the first one to the type username, and then the second one to type password. And that's all we need to make autofill work. Now, if you use the alpha version of Compose, this is actually even easier because we've added a new modifier, content type, which lets you just set this directly with one line of code. Next up is auto-sizing text, or making your text automatically adapt to the size of its container. This is as easy as adding this new auto-size parameter to your text composable. And you can even configure it with minimum and maximum font sizes, or with the granularity of each step. Another modifier we've added is animate bounds, which lets you automatically animate the position and the size of a composable in its container. This is similar to animated content size, which you might already be using, but this one does both the size and the position at the same time, given that you're in a look-ahead scope. Then another new modifier, this time to do visibility tracking. In the latest stable version of Compose, we added onLayout rect changed. This is a low-level API that you can use to track a composable's position within either its root, the window, or the screen. And it unlocks various use cases, mostly related to visibility tracking or position tracking. Now, it's similar to onGlobally positioned, which you might already be using to track the location, but this one is more performant out of the box, and it allows you to add throttle or debouncing, which makes it okay to use for use cases like tracking the location of an item while you're scrolling a lazy list. And in the alpha versions of Compose, we've added some higher-level APIs on top of this low-level API, which are very, very specific for various use cases. So first of all, we added onVisibility changed, which gives you a callback anytime the visibility of that composable changes. So it enters or it exits the viewport. This is great for use cases like automatically playing or pausing a video when it comes into view. And we're actually using it in Androidify. We've also added on first visible, which is great for use cases like impression tracking, because it gives a callback anytime a composable has been in view for a certain amount of time. So you can already start using this stable on-layout rect change modifier in your stable version of Compose, and then you can use these higher level APIs when you use the alpha version. You can learn more about these APIs and many more in the 2 brand new technical talks that we're releasing as part of this year's I/O, for best practices in text input and best practices in accessibility. But we haven't been focusing only on adding new features to Compose. And new features also shouldn't be the only reason why you're upgrading your Compose version. Another consideration is performance. When you run your app on older versions of Compose, you might sometimes see some jank. This is what some of you have mentioned. When you run older versions and you run them on lower-end devices, there might be some jank. In this case, we're using an internal benchmark project. And in that internal benchmark project, we've just built an app and we're running it with versions of Compose from 2023. We're running it on a Pixel 3a device and we're seeing jank rates of about 2%. Now, what we did is we kept the source code exactly the same, but we updated the version of Compose. And so what we see is that with later versions of Compose, this jank rate already drops to about 1%. Then, if we update the Compose version to March 2025, this drops to less than 0.5%. And with the latest stable version of Compose, we hardly have any jank left. We're at less than 0.1%. Now, this is just one example benchmark that demonstrates all the work that our engineers have been doing in the past years to make the performance of Compose better. But our engineers are constantly finding and applying other optimizations as well. For example, we're introducing pausable composition, which splits the composition over several frames. We are offloading some of the harder work of the main thread, starting with text measurements. And we're allowing you to customize the prefetching of items in a lazy list. So between these new features that I just mentioned and the performance updates, now really is a time for you to prioritize upgrading your Compose version and get access to all of these added benefits. Now, remember that I said that 60% of the top 1,000 apps are using Compose? Several of those are actually Google apps. Google Photos, Maps, and Drive, and more have been using Compose in production for years. And recently, we've been working with these app teams to improve the stability of our Compose releases by catching bugs at an earlier stage. Because some of you have mentioned that upgrading Compose versions can sometimes be difficult. So let me show you a little bit more about how we did this. What you're used to is that whenever we have a Compose change, we merge this into the Compose main branch, and then it goes through this alpha, beta, RC, and stable release cycle. But for Google Apps, this actually works a little bit differently, because all of the Google apps share a single version of Compose among them. And we used to update that version about once a month. But recently, we've been working to update that about once every day. So any change in Compose that makes it into the main branch actually makes it to all of these Google apps within days and can make it to millions of users within a week. Now, that also means that for new features, we are adding feature flags to make sure that we allow for early testing by these Google apps or by you in alpha versions of Compose. And you can test them and you can let us know if there are any performance regressions or bugs with the implementation. And so we have this quick iteration of testing out new functionality. And at some point, whenever the changes make it into a beta or a stable version of Compose, they've often been running in production in these Google apps with millions of users for weeks, if not months. That should give you a lot more certainty in upgrading to the latest Compose stable version whenever it comes out. Now, another stability improvement that we did is that we did a big sweep of all of our experimental APIs. You shared with us that having too many of these experimental APIs can sometimes make the API service feel a little bit less stable. So we went through them, and for many of the APIs, we cleaned them up and made sure that we could stabilize them. But some of them were actually experimental for several years now because we eventually wanted to get around to fixing them. But they're good. They're either good enough as they are, and we stabilize them now, or we deprecated them and we will remove them for now. So with that, we reduced 32% of the experimental APIs over the course of just 1 year. And looking at some of the biggest contributors, Foundation and Compose UI, that number even increases to 66%. So this should give you much more security in using stable APIs when you're using Compose. And also, we plan to remove even more of those in the future as well. Now, so far, I've been talking about... Thank you. Now, so far, I've been mentioning Compose, and I've been talking about all the core modules, right? Foundation, runtime, UI, etc. But actually, we are working on a wider suite of libraries. Compose is part of the set of Jetpack libraries, and we've been working on adding Compose support on more of these libraries as well. You've heard a little bit about this in the developer keynote, but I wanted to expand a little bit more in this talk. So first of all, any app has navigation, and we've heard that the Jetpack navigation solution can sometimes be challenging in a Compose world, especially when you're dealing with the backstack or with hoisting state. It doesn't seem to quite fit that use case. And so we sat down and we re-envisioned what we think Compose should look like, what we think navigation should look like in a Compose world. And thus we're introducing Navigation 3. A first alpha of a new artifact that makes it much easier to work with navigation in a Compose app, because this is built with Compose and using Compose. And so let me show you what that library offers. The library makes it easy to do transitions between different destinations using animations, to implement predictive back, or to create shared element transitions. It has a flexible layered architecture that is adaptive out of the box and works across form factors, including XR. And it even has a material design integration. But most importantly, it is fully customizable. So if you need more control, we give you all the control you need. You can, if you want to, control the full backstack and implement navigation exactly the way that it is needed for your app. Now, this library is currently in alpha, so we're still working on it. But we really want to make sure that this is the best navigation library we could be building. So please go and check it out. There's full documentation available. And we would really like to hear from you if this works for your use cases. Then another thing we heard from you loud and clear is that you want Compose support for camera and media experiences. And so we've been working on adding this support. We have Media 3 and Camera X as our recommended solutions for these experiences in your Android apps. And here as well, we re-envisioned what this should look like in a Compose world. So we didn't just wrap preview view or player view and call it a day. We're actually building building blocks from the ground up and making sure that you can build whatever your app needs, as much or as little. That unfortunately does mean that it will take a little bit longer to get to full parity with player view and preview view, but it also means that you have full control over your camera or media experience. So let me demonstrate what we mean with that for the Media 3 artifact. Here you see Androidify, and Androidify has this use case where we wanted to show a tutorial video. It's quite a trivial video, like we know the URL, we know the aspect ratio. The only thing we want to do is automatically play it and then show a play pause button on top of it so that this video can be paused for accessibility purposes. Let's implement it. We start with a video player composable in our sample app. And what you see is that we're passing in a player instance, which is coming from a Media 3 library. Then what we do is we simply forward this player instance to the player surface composable as part of the new artifact. And that surface composable actually takes care of the rendering. Nothing we have to do. Then, to add a play pause button, instead of calling the library directly and letting it render it for us, we actually implement our own, and we pass the player into it. So, how does that my play pause button look like? Well, what do we do with the player instance? We create a play pause button state. This is part of the artifact, and it allows us to interact with the player, and it allows us to show data from the player. So we control the UI, but the artifact controls all the pesky logic of whether we should be showing a play or a pause button, and what to do when we click it. And with that, it works. That's all. And with that, you saw how Compose makes it easy and how it has all the features, performance, stability, and libraries for you to build apps.